Hello everyone and welcome to Talent Development Day 2026. My name is Sharifa Smith and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. For those of you who are visually impaired, I have brown hair, brown eyes and a dark blue colored shirt on. Now before we get started, before I hand it over to our speaker, I would like to go over some practical information. You can turn on the subtitles in the right corner of your screen. We will also be using an interactive tool today called Mentimeter. You can access Mentimeter by going to menti.com and fill in the code or scan the QR code. That should be now visible on your screen as well. So please go to menti.com and fill in the code or scan the QR code. On Mentimeter, you can also submit your questions in the Q&A during the session. Towards the end of the session, you will also receive a pop-up with our survey. Please fill it out as we would look forward to receiving your feedback. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce your speaker for today. This is Tash Koster-Thomas with Psychological Safety in Action. Enjoy.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. It's great to have you here. My name is Tash Koster-Thomas. My pronouns are she, her. I am a diversity, equity and inclusion consultant supporting organizations around the world on everything in terms of developing inclusive cultures, supporting employee resource networks, and generally making the world a better place is what I'm hoping to do. Today's session is based specifically around psychological safety and how we can put that into action in the workplace. And in the interest of creating psychological safety, I always start my sessions with a few guidelines just to support our interactions, particularly via the Menti and at the end during the Q&A. So to approach this topic with sensitivity, recognizing that we come from a range of different experiences, lived experiences, upbringings, and therefore some of us may have faced challenges that others haven't. We're going to be exploring new topics today, and you'll be exploring lots of different things with your colleagues around you, potentially in the conversations that come after today. Just be mindful that we're not debating people's identities or lived experience in those discussions. Today is very much about being curious. I want you to come with your curiosity, particularly when we get to the Q&A portion of today. Just be mindful that questions aren't too intrusive or personal. And finally, this is a learning environment. And one of the key aspects of learning and being able to learn effectively is actually having permission to make mistakes and get it wrong. So I'm inviting you to not only get it wrong in my sessions, but also hopefully to develop a culture where it's okay to make mistakes with those around you in the workplace. So these are just some few guidelines for us to work towards throughout today's session. In terms of what we're going to be covering today, we'll be looking at the foundations of psychological safety, and there's lots of different ways that psychological safety, how we understand it today, there's three kind of different pillars of what builds that foundation. Why it matters, I've got lots of statistics and data for you and research that shows the positive impact of when we're creating psychological safety and therefore the negative when it is not in existence. There is a little bit of neuroscience. I will admit I'm not a neuroscientist, but there is a little bit of neuroscience in today so we can understand the science behind what's happening in our minds, and then looking at how we develop psychological safety and taking some actions out of today. But I want to start with a quote, and it's going to be one of our first speakers today. When people feel safe to speak up, they're not just sharing ideas, they're protecting their mental health. When people feel safe to speak up, they're not just sharing their ideas, they're protecting their mental health. And I think this is a really key point when we think about psychological safety, is it's not just about I feel comfortable, but actually there is a long-term impact in terms of how we show up in our mental health, particularly within the workplace. And when we don't have it, our mental health is really heavily impacted. So that should be a massive driver as to why we're wanting to create it. So we'll be looking at some key thinkers throughout today's session. We're going to start with Amy Edmondson, who is kind of the foundation of the early work of understanding psychological safety and the theory around it. Amanda Potter, who is kind of delving into our neuroscience of psychological safety. And then finally, Tim Clark, who is a great person to look at when we're looking at how do we implement it? How can we do it? And what's the actions we can take within a workplace to create psychological safety? But first I want to come to a Menti for you. So it's just been mentioned, you can scan the QR code. I'm going to ask you to do that now, or you can go to menti.com and pop in the code that you see there. And the first question I have for you today is, how confident are you that you could explain what psychological safety is? We've got a varying scale here in confidence. So right from kind of it's completely new to me to slightly confident all the way up to very confident. Just a reminder that Menti is anonymous. So it's okay for you to be open and honest in your answer. I don't know what you've responded. Just a reminder, you can scan the QR code to access it, or you can go to menti.com and pop in the code that you see there, all the 8s that you can pop in there, and we'll see what's coming up. So far, 33% of you slightly confident is normally anonymous, but when everybody answers the same thing, it no longer becomes anonymous. So I can see everybody so far has answered slightly confident. I appreciate that. So hopefully today is going to really develop that understanding and that confidence in terms of how we can describe and explain psychological safety, which I know most definitely today's session will do that. Pause for a moment, see if there's any more, let the rest of you jump on. A note that once you're into Menti, keep that kind of open in your second window or on your device so that you can access it really quickly as they come up throughout the session. Okay, so somewhat confident. We've got fairly confident jumping in there. So we're sitting in that middle stack. Oh, I love it when I get not confident at all. Thank you. I love it when I get that it's completely new and we're not necessarily there yet. Okay. Well, let's jump into the session. So when we think about an understanding of what psychological safety is, there are lots of different kind of beliefs. And I guess the base level definition is a shared belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And this definition comes straight from Amy Edmondson's work. So she's a professor at Harvard Business School. And what was really interesting is she was doing global research around teams and understanding learning and development. And her research focused particularly on the complexities of how people work together and within complex organizations. And what was really interesting, so this story begins in 1990s, which is when Amy Edmondson was studying hospitals and particularly hospital teams as part of her PhD research. And what she noticed is what you'd expect is the most successful and best performing teams made fewer medical errors. That's what you'd expect, right? They're performing really well, therefore they're making fewer mistakes. And actually the data showed something very, very different. It showed that the best teams actually reported more errors. That's right. The best and most effective teams actually reported more errors, not fewer. So it's a contradiction. And this enabled her to then look closer at the data and really understand it wasn't that high performing teams were making more mistakes, it's actually that they felt more comfortable and more willing to talk about those mistakes and to report them. Hence this, a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So it became the foundation of her work. So when we think about why it matters, well, when it's low, people are hiding their mistakes. And when it's low, we have higher stress and anxiety. There's a lot of mental energy that's focused around protecting ourselves and that self-preservation. There is a cost to making a mistake. However, when psychological safety was high, we saw people not only reported mistakes, but they can learn from those mistakes. Now I know what I did wrong, and it's safe for me to explore what I can do differently to get it right next time. Confidence and trust started to grow for individuals and amongst the team as overall. And then the energy was spent on collaboration and innovation rather than self-preservation and protection. So you start to see this direct knock-on effect of when a team felt it was safe to make a mistake and to speak up, and psychological safety was present, then actually teams were more successful. So I'm going to come to our next Menti, which is, I want you to think of one word that makes you feel safe at work. In one word, what makes you feel safe at work? So we're going to have a beautiful word cloud that's going to come up. Shared vigilance, empathy, love that. Teamwork. I'll give you 2 words. One phrase, I should say, that makes you feel safe at work. What are the things that you want to see and experience at work that create a feeling of safety, confidence in yourself, even safety and trust within your team? What is that thing that makes you feel safe to show up? Respect, RESPECT, understanding. Really nice one. We take the time to just really understand each other rather than making assumptions, I guess. Trust. Maybe it takes a while to build that trust. I really think empathy is a great one. I know it's one of the first ones that came up. Trust, when it goes big, it means lots of us are agreeing with that term. Anything else that we see here? A few more moments for us to share. What is one word that makes you feel safe at work? And what's interesting is we're going to start to see some of these words come out as we go through the session today. Kindness. Simple acts, right? Simple acts of kindness. And we often think of these big moments, but actually it can be simply asking somebody, oh, do you want me to grab you a water whilst I'm going to grab one for myself? Or how are you doing this morning? I know you probably had a really busy weekend, whatever it is. It's your daughter's birthday tomorrow, isn't it? Like those just simple moments. Honesty, open communication. Interesting. Trust is still our outstander there. And it's so hard to sometimes kind of connect that, and how do we build that trust? I like this word, Cloud. It's making me very happy. Support. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at some of the statistics around specifically psychological safety and mental health. So we see 74% less stress in teams that are psychologically safe. So think about what that does in terms of sick days and people taking time away from work, experiencing burnout. We're reducing the potential for that. We see 60% of employees say that their mental health impacts their ability to work. So when we're protecting it, we're increasing our team's ability to be able to do the work that we need them to do. And we're less likely to experience frequent stress when employees feel safe at work. So it's reducing stress, not just in the workplace, but I'm sure at home. And so when we break down the kind of 3 core principles of Amy Edmondson's work, it breaks down in this way. So framing work as a learning problem. Rather than something that you have to get perfect all the time, we want to think about it as a problem that we're also solving together. So it's shifting away from getting it right to learning as we go. Let's test, learn, and improve together rather than having to have all the answers. Acknowledging your own fallibility. So admit that you don't have all the answers, and thinking about maybe some of the work environments that we're in, maybe that feels really stressful to do. So how do we improve a situation? How do we stand forward? This is where I often look at leaders to be the role models in this, to admit, I know I'm a leader, but I don't know everything. Feels counterintuitive. I might miss something, help me see what I might be missing, right? And then finally, modeling that curiosity, asking questions and inviting different perspectives. We sometimes assume that if somebody has an answer or somebody has an idea, they'll automatically share it. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we have to go out and invite that difference of perspective in, particularly when the majority of our team is maybe agreeing in one direction. It's even harder for us to challenge that status quo. So what do you think I could be missing? What do we maybe need to do differently? So here we start to get the foundation of psychological safety. And I'm sure many of you can already maybe look at some of these elements and think, okay, I can maybe see where there might be cracks in terms of how my team feels, or maybe actually this is something that we're really active in doing and we make sure that we do this, but maybe some rooms for improvement. So we then step into our second expert, so Amanda Potter. Psychological safety isn't just a feeling, it's a chemical state in the brain that allows people to think, learn, and perform at their best. So there's a chemical reaction happening in our brain. So Amanda Potter is the CEO of B Talent and is an occupational psychologist, hence why she's looking at what's happening in kind of the neuroscience side of this. And she builds on the work of Amy Edmondson, looking specifically at the brain chemistry for learning, engagement, and safety. So we're kind of going to connect the two. So when we think about the neuroscience of this, we have kind of 2 versions of our brain. So we have a brain that's working with perceived threat or judgment, and we have a brain that's working within a psychologically safe space. So let's look at the side of our brain when our brain is working in a space where we feel threat or judgment, which many of us, I'm sure, have experienced, not just within the workplace, but also in our everyday life. This activates our amygdala. This floods our system with adrenaline and cortisol, and this is our stress hormones, right? It narrows focus, it reduces working memory capacity. It basically can often create that fight or flight or even freeze mode. But the most important thing is it suppresses neuroplasticity, it suppresses our creativity, our ability to look for different perspectives or think differently. And so it's actually having the direct opposite effect of what we want, right? When we're in an environment where we feel like there is perceived threat or judgment, and that our brain behaves in exactly the same way to physical threat, i.e., there's a big lion in front of me growling at me, compared to emotional psychological threat. I've made a mistake at work, and what's the judgment that's going to happen if I admit this mistake, right? The same chemicals are lighting up in the brain for both physical and non-physical threats. Something slightly different happens when we're in a psychologically safe environment. Same situation, maybe we make a mistake and we are faced with the adrenaline, but if it's in a psychologically safe environment, we have the ability for all of these other chemicals to come out. So we get dopamine. This is our happy, it increases motivation. It's our happy drug that's often kind of mentioned. We've got oxytocin. This increases our sense of empathy and belonging. It actually dampens the amygdala. So it kind of stops it firing off. It's going to improve our collaboration. Serotonin, this is around being respected and valued, but it also regulates our mood. So we're able to take on different perspectives. It builds confidence in ourselves so we don't necessarily feel so combative. And it also stabilizes our attention. Endorphins, this is our humor, our shared success. It reduces pain and stress, and it reinforces that sense of enjoyment and teamwork. This is when you get sent away on team away days. This is what we're trying to create when you're suddenly having to problem solve some physical activity. We're hoping that we can kickstart some of these happy kind of endorphins, etc., in order to bond us as a team and create a psychologically safe space for us to be in and work in. So there's a real positive side in terms of chemically what's happening when we're in a psychologically safe environment. We have the ability to not only collaborate, but also to create new ideas and to innovate. And so Amanda Potter says, how do we create a psychologically safe environment? What are the key principles in terms of her work that we're aiming for? And so she took the work of Amy Edmondson and broke them down into 3 clear areas. And I think when it comes to how we implement this in a workplace, it becomes a bit easier, right? Purpose, trust, and connection. Purpose, trust, and connection. Now, these could very easily be our workplace values, right? So we start with purpose. We need to understand why we're here, why our work matters. If any of you have read the Simon Sinek book, Start With Why, this is why. Why does this work matter? And for many of us, we recognize that we're often in, maybe not be the role, but maybe we're asked to do something, we're on a project, and we don't really understand why. And therefore, we kind of lose engagement with it. We maybe don't feel like we have the same creativity or creative mindset. We don't have the same motivation because I don't understand what the purpose, the bigger picture is here. And when we have a purpose, that's what starts to release dopamine. That's our brain's reward for motivation, right? So really being clear in a purpose. And it doesn't always have to be that we're explaining the biggest picture, the organizational picture, but certainly this task or this project. What is the purpose? What part of the machine am I working here? Trust. I said some of these words would materialize. It was our biggest one in the word cloud. And here it's been scientifically proven, right? Built through consistency, honesty, and psychological security. So a real key thing here is when we're building trust, it is that consistency that you're always going to show up. I think of how I'm building trust right now with my toddler. I dropped her off to daycare today. It was a very upsetting and sad affair for both of us. She was very emotional. But the trust for her is going to be built by mummy always comes back. Always come back to get you. No matter what, I'm saying goodbye, but I'll always be there. That pattern of behavior will continue. And we see often when trust is eroded, we see the same negative pattern of behavior. And so that person then almost anticipates the judgment. They anticipate the attack, and then that's where the lack of psychological safety is also justified, right? So it's the opposite. How are we strengthening those bonds? And then finally, connection. This is genuine human relationships. Genuine, feeling seen, valued, and included. And this is serotonin. This is our confidence and belonging. It lowers cortisol. If I'm in an environment, we all have it, I feel like these are my people. I like going here. I want to be in this environment a lot because I feel safe to be myself, and I feel like I'm respected for being myself in this environment. And so thinking about how do we build that genuine human connection? And I heard an amazing story years ago where someone shared that they were transitioning from one job to another. And they had gone into their new job and they'd met with what was going to be their new manager, but they still had, I think, 6 to 8 weeks of their old job to complete before they started in the new position. And in that 6 to 8 weeks, their birthday occurred. They said on their birthday, they received a card from their new manager saying happy birthday, and we're really looking forward to, the team and everybody else is really looking forward to welcoming you in a couple of weeks' time. I said that connection was built for me already. And they said it's something that they now continue to do themselves, even when a team member's maybe away on parental leave or on sick leave or traveling or hasn't yet started. They continue this same little ritual of building that connection, even though that person isn't there, from a distance, to help kind of continue to build psychological safety within the team. So it can sometimes be these really small acts that help us to develop this within a wider setting. So purpose, trust, and connection. And when we look at this in relation to team performance, it really goes up. So psychological safety was a big Google study done. It showed that actually the predictor of team effectiveness was the existence of psychological safety. Number one, over and above knowledge, intelligence, seniority, amount of people, lived experience, psychological safety was the number one predictor of team effectiveness. 50% higher productivity in teams that are psychologically safe. Innovation increases. This is why. And then we see here 4 times more likely to report feeling engaged and motivated when we're experiencing psychological safety. So this then leads on to reduction in turnover overall in terms of our experience. So I'm going to come to my next mentee for you. On a scale of 1 to 5, how safe do you feel to share mistakes or to challenge in your current team? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very, 5 being extremely safe. On a scale of 1 to 5, how safe do you feel to share mistakes? I made a mistake, I got it wrong. That's the wrong figure that I put in there. I forgot to send that proposal off by the deadline, whatever it might be. Or to challenge your current team. Everybody else in the team is going, yes, I think this is a good idea. And you're the one person that, I don't know, I think we could do this. Or have we thought about it this way? Or no, I don't agree. And we see lots of examples, particularly in advertising, where it becomes apparent that maybe there wasn't somebody there to challenge the team. And we see sort of an advert go out to the public and it's deeply offensive to a portion of society or a group of people. And we all sit there and question, who signed that off? Who said yes to that advertising, that picture? And actually, it turns out there's probably a team that maybe didn't feel safe to challenge. And that's why it comes out. So we've got 1s and 2s. Maybe we're already able to articulate just from what we've seen so far about what it is in terms of why we don't feel safe, what element is missing from our team. That means it's quite hard to feel safe to challenge or to make mistakes. So we're kind of in the latter end. So maybe they're in the 3s or the 4s in terms of our scoring here. And it's okay just to kind of think on it in yourself. And it might also be that you notice in different settings, and that's the other side of things, right? I might feel actually really safe to challenge this individual, but in my wider team, I don't feel. Or I feel really safe, excuse me, to challenge actually my leader. But maybe when somebody else steps into the room or when somebody else is absent, maybe I don't feel. So the dynamics will shift and change. It's not an absolute. And that's what's really important to understand, particularly as we go to our final thinker today. Thank you for those responses. So psychological safety is a condition in which you feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, safe to challenge the status quo, all without fear of being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished. Now, this is a quote from Tim Clark, who is our final thinker today. So we're looking at psychological safety, and particularly in leadership. So we see increase in psychological safety when managers model vulnerability. There's a lot of work. Brene Brown has done a lot of work around vulnerability and leaning in, etc. We see the impact, positive impact, when leaders model that. 89% of employees say leaders' reaction to mistakes directly impact whether they speak up again. 89% say how the leader responds directly impacts whether they speak up again. I think about from a leadership perspective, it's a really important thing to know, right? You want somebody to speak up. 26% of leaders create psychological safety consistently within their teams. 26% is actually quite a low figure, right? When we think about the amount of leaders around the world. It's a McKinsey study, so it's a global study. So it's something that we really have to actively work on. And there's a great book, Rebel Ideas, by Matthew Syed, is another great book that looks at particularly that middle statistic, a lot of examples where the environment wasn't safe to speak up, and the impact, sometimes fatal impact, of not feeling safe to speak up in an environment. So what's a little bit different about Tim Clark's model is that I think he gives far more of an action-oriented way of thinking about psychological safety. So we have here respect and permission axes, and we start with his 4 stages of psychological safety. So the first stage is inclusion safety. Safe to be included. That's it. I feel included. That's rung 1 on the ladder. Second stage is learner safety. Is it safe to learn? i.e., is it safe to make mistakes? Contributor safety. Is it safe to contribute, to share my ideas, and will my ideas be received? And then finally we have, and this is kind of where innovation really takes place, is challenger safety. So these are our 4 stages as per Tim Clark. And the important thing here is you can't skip stages. So you can't get to challenger safety without first having inclusion, learner, and contributor safety. But it helps us to really start to understand where we might be lacking and why certain people don't feel that sense of psychological safety. And so I'm going to break down each of these in a little bit more depth for you today. So first and foremost, we have inclusion safety. So what we often talks the worth versus worthiness test. So safety is rooted in worth, not worthiness. However, often when we look at people, we judge them by their worthiness. What are you going to offer? It's an earned value. You've got to demonstrate something in order for me to see you as worthy. When actually, everybody has an innate right to be included, to be treated with respect and human dignity before they have to prove themselves. And this is actually the space that we should perform from. It's the intrinsic value that every human can bring. Particularly when we think we've just hired somebody, they're now part of our team. They've actually passed a worthiness test, right? To get there. But still, we often still apply that same worthiness test to them. And actually, it should be a fundamental part of being human. Be human, be harmless. And therefore, you have worth, and I acknowledge your worth and your dignity. You're included. So for some of us, it may be already that we recognize this is the first stumbling block. Actually, as a team, we look at people through the worthiness test. What can you bring? What can you offer before accepting, actually, you're a human with unique lived experience and talent, and it's worth having you here, and I want to include you. So already it might be a little bit of reframing for us. We then get into learner safety, so our second rung. When this is low, people are hiding mistakes. Where questions are rare. We're maybe not speaking up or asking. Feedback feels threatening, or it feels like a personal attack. If we're giving feedback, it feels like it's personal because of me, rather than separate and a behavior. Only the confident voices speak. So it's a certain characteristic, maybe it's an extrovert or a neurotypical thinker. Those are the only people, and we definitely don't model any form of vulnerability, right? When it's high, however, people share their mistakes and then fixes can happen early. Curiosity is visible, but it's also welcomed. I want you to be curious. Feedback feels developmental. I'm giving you this feedback because I know you can do so much better and I see your potential, versus you've made a mistake and it's wrong. Everyone participates in the learning. And a great example of this that's actually given in Tim Clark's book, 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, is a university in America, and they had an advanced maths course. And typically, because it was such an advanced course, it had a very low pass rate, and therefore very few people would sign up to it. And there was a change of professor, and he approached the topic very differently. And for him, rather than in terms of the learning process, when everyone was in the lecture hall, instead of asking people to put their hand up when they had the correct answer, he asked people to put their hand up when they had an answer, regardless of whether they thought it was right or wrong. Just put your hand up when you've got something. And then people obviously inevitably put their hands up, and inevitably people would get it wrong. But then we could all learn together and correct the mistake collectively. And people got more and more confident to then share in the room, I've got here, is it right? No, it's wrong. Okay, let's learn that together. Rather than, I've got my answer, he's given the right answer on the board, my answer doesn't match that, I'll go home and figure it out. And the knock-on effect of teaching in this way was that, number one, it was a much higher pass rate. And because of that much higher pass rate, many more people signed on to that course. And there was so many more, like it was 100% increase in pass and sign up. And it was just that shift from right to an answer. It's why at the very beginning of this, I said, I give you permission to learn. I give you permission to make mistakes and to get it wrong. And in particular, when it comes to in leadership positions, we have to give ourselves permission to make mistakes. Some of the most effective leaders I've seen, particularly when they're supporting on areas out of their expertise, is when they step into a room and say, I don't have all the answers here, but I know, in the room we can find an answer together. And so we're really welcoming the opportunity to learn together. Can you show me how I don't understand or have made a mistake? We then go into contributor safety, and there are some key elements of contributor safety. We're starting with, we delegate with trust here. So we're giving autonomy, we're setting clear outcomes, and it's not rigid instructions. We're giving flexibility for people to be able to come with their own ideas and perspective. It's a really hard balance with contributor safety. But it satisfies our, deep human need to make a difference. I want to be able to contribute. I feel safe to share my skills and abilities to contribute and add value and have meaningful impact. So how do we give that to people? We need to give them autonomy rather than kind of micromanaging, and recognizing that their input matters. We have acknowledged the contributions. That idea moved us forward. Thank you. It may not have solve the problem, but you added something, right? We'll give it a go. We don't know if it's going to work, but thank you for speaking up and providing us with something to go forward with, right? Asking for ideas. Who has a different take on this? I'm seeking those contributions. I'm seeking different perspectives, and I'm giving my team permission to be able to share that perspective. And I often see this in organizations where, people kind of, when they want to take an action forward, rather than just going to their default people, I always go to the same people to get a response or to get feedback on an idea. And instead, I'm going to go to the new staff member. I'm going to go to the most junior staff member. I'm going to go to the new intern. And I'm going to ask them to look at it and give me their insight, because they don't have the same experience as me. And maybe they'll spot something that didn't even occur to me just by way of being in a different position. Remove ego. You can share credit and you can accept that somebody else might have a better idea. Probably does have a better idea. It's a really big one, and it's recognizing that but I also feel like it takes a weight off your shoulder. You don't have to be the only one coming with a solution. And then create clarity. People know where they can contribute meaningfully. So there will be times, particularly in leadership roles, where actually contributions are going to get really, really challenging. And so we set up clear kind of markers for, I'm asking for your feedback here, I'm going to take your ideas on, and then we'll feed back to you what we're doing with that, right? It's not that it's just always a free for all and you can always throw in, but that we make it clear when we need that feedback and how that feedback takes place. And then our final one, challenger safety. Safety to challenge the status quo. And this is our human need to make things better. It feels safe to speak up and challenge, and to start to ask the hard questions, to share candid feedback, and to offer new ideas without fear of embarrassment, judgment, retribution, right? It's the highest expression of trust within a team that you can challenge. So it's where people use their voice to not only add value, but also to protect and improve the system itself. And the most effective teams, so that when this is done, for example, NASA, we're sending people into space. We need you to be able to challenge if you think we've missed something, because it is life or death decisions that we're making, right? And so they actually appoint the role of a challenger. It's somebody's role within innovation meetings, within decision making, to challenge the team and say, no, I don't agree with this, and to have the team think differently. Challenging can feel really risky, and it is definitely that interpersonal, that personal risk. So am I safe to speak up, and is it worth it? Often that's the thing that stops us from challenging. Is it worth it? What's the knock-on effect? Am I going to be listened to, or is it just going to be dismissed? And if it's going to be dismissed, then the worth isn't there, so I don't, right? So how do we start to create challenger safety? We invite. Do you want to hear my perspective? We invite that. We listen. Will I be heard with respect, right? Acknowledging what somebody has shared. Thinking about, will my challenge be valued, or will it be punished? These are the conversations. This is the questions that we're asking ourselves. What action will be taken? Will anything change if I challenge? And if the answer is no, people probably won't challenge. Not in a constructive way anyway. It will happen in the depths of, feedback surveys maybe, or in the grumblings of individuals or groups of people. And so these are the constant questions that we're asking ourselves day to day when it comes to psychological safety and challenging the situation. So when we look at this overall picture and we take all of this work together, I want you to think about now, which stage do you feel your team is at right now? So we come back to our mentee. Do you think you are at inclusion safety? Are you at learner safety? Are you at contributor safety? Or are you at challenger safety? And think about, I'm going to bring it into your immediate team. So we're coming back to the mentee, thinking about your immediate team, people that you work with day to day, that you see in the office, or that you interact with a lot via email or on Zoom, Teams, whichever. Where would you say that you are? Is it inclusion safety? Okay, I feel included, but I definitely don't feel safe to learn. Are we learner, contributor, or challenger safety? Thinking about what I've shared with you today. And maybe already we can start to see the difference between the four areas, and maybe some of the things that we want to implement in order to get us to the next step along. That's what we're always working towards. Giving a moment for those to come in. Again, scan the QR code, or you've got the menti.com and you can pop in the code. And also start to think, we're going to have questions coming up in a little bit. So if you've already got your questions, you can start to also be putting those into the Menti Q&A. So we've got those ready to rock and roll before we come to our last few slides. So I'm curious, which stage do you feel your team is at right now? Inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, or challenger safety? I know sometimes it takes a little while to load on my side. Inclusion, some of you, quite a few of you in contributor safety as well. Big chunk of you in contributor safety, it's great to see. Learner safety, kind of equal to inclusion there. No one yet feeling like we're challenger safety just yet. I think always asking that question, is it worth it? I think that is the center, the core of recognizing challenger safety. How do we answer that question? Is it worth it? And when we're staying silent, that's when we get the problems, right? When we're inviting that feedback and that dissent, and we make it clear that it's safe to do so. Okay. I mean, it's what I'd expect to see. I'm impressed that so many of you feel and contribute to safety. That's actually really kind of positive to see and to recognize. And maybe those of you in inclusion and learner can sort of see where you need to go next. So let's look at how are we building psychological safety, both as leaders, as teams, and as individuals. So as leaders, admitting mistakes or uncertainty openly. I don't have all the answers, and I know I don't. Asking for impact and acting on the feedback. So really, like, being candid, like, what can I do better? We did this, and what could we have done differently? Listen to understand, not to respond. This is for everybody. We often listen already with our answer in our mind, rather than listening to understand the person in front of me and what they're saying. It comes into kind of cultural humility and leading with humility. Show appreciation when others speak up. Thank you. I remember in several of my sessions, one sticks out in particular. I was delivering a session around LGBTQ inclusion in person, and at some point this guy at the back had been quite quiet, and he asked a question that I could see by the rest of the room. Everyone was like, oh, I can't believe you just asked that. It was really almost opposing what I just shared, and it was like, I don't really get it, like, why this? And I could feel the energy in the room, and I started by saying, I just want to acknowledge, thank you for asking that question. Thank you for being brave enough to raise your hand and ask a question that I know must have been quite difficult to raise in this room. So I just really want to say I appreciate you bringing that to the room. I'm sure you're probably not the only person thinking of it. Then I went into the answer, and the difference that then made to the room, but also him in engaging in the session for the rest of the conversation, was incredible. So really showing appreciation when people speak up. Teams. Establish shared norms for how the team communicates, how we give feedback, how we disagree. One thing I will say is I've seen a couple of times it's used. I've seen a founder who decided fearless feedback, and it was given publicly on an open Slack channel that everybody could see it. And I spoke to individuals in the team, and it made so many people feel really uncomfortable. It wasn't a shared norm, it was his norm. And so we have to find a shared norm that everybody feels somewhat comfortable with in a way of working. Focus on fixing problems, not assigning blame. Okay, the issue's there, can't change it. What are we going to do to shift it and to build a solution? Creating those regular loops of how we reflect on what we did and what we could have done differently. And then as individuals, it's step in when maybe you notice exclusion or silence happening, amplifying the quieter voices, whatever that may be. That's part of our inclusion. Acknowledging others' contributions publicly. That was a great idea. I just want to take a moment to say, Tash, that was a great idea. Check in with your colleagues after team meetings or particularly challenging moments or discussions to see that they're doing okay. That is that coming back to that trust and that connection point of Amanda Potter's work. It's how we build connection. And finally, offer empathy before we offer solutions. It's one that I often have to remind myself in my own household. So my final question for you via the Mentee is, what's one action could you take this week to support psychological safety in your team? What is one action you could take this week to support psychological safety? And ideally, it's something that can become part of your day-to-day habit, part of your weekly habit that you do day in, day out in order to create that safety within your team. And you can put that in the Mentee. You can also start putting your questions in the Q&A. Here are some resources based on the things that I've mentioned today. We have The Fearless Organization, which is Amy Edmondson's book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, which is the book by Tim Clark, and also Amanda Potter actually has a podcast, The Chief Psychology Officer. It's a great podcast that you can find. Actually, it's got a webpage. You don't have to be on any particular provider, but you go to chiefpsychologyofficer.com, I believe, and you can listen to all the podcast episodes there. But I very much would suggest each of these areas to learn more. I'm curious to see what our actions are before we go into Q&A, actions that we'll take this week to support psychological safety within our team. And a reminder, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It's not, I'm going to buy my entire team flowers or buy everybody chocolate, right? Ask colleagues how they feel and really listen to the answer and really understand and acknowledge and empathize with the answer. In Tim Clark's book, he's got a really great list of questions that can highlight sort of where your team are or where individuals feel in terms of psychological safety. It's about, I think it's 7 or 11 questions that you can ask. And based on those answers, it can give you really clear indications about where you maybe need to work or what you need to adapt or maybe do differently to support psychological safety within your organization. Ask for help. Great one. And particularly depending on your role, that could be really impactful that you're asking for help, recognizing, we have leaders as a position. I run or I lead the team, but also we have acts of leadership. So I'm taking action that supports, leadership and role modeling within my team. And asking for help can be a great act of leadership. So thank you for dropping that one in. Show empathy. It's actually a very hard skill. True empathy is really hard. So I'm all for people developing that. As mentioned, we have Q&A now as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Menti. I am more than happy, and we have quite a bit of time to get through some questions. So throw them at me. I'll be more than happy to answer them. You can also contact me at any of these locations. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tash Koster-Thomas. I am also on social media. And Breaking the Distance is a platform that I run alongside my wife, which is promoting positive LGBTQ representation online and on social media as well. So please feel free to reach out. I welcome the conversations beyond just here.
Thank you so much, Tash. I'm going to have a look at the Q&A. You can still submit your questions through the Mentimeter, so please go to menti.com and you can share your questions with us in the Q&A. Let's have a look. I see a couple of questions, one of them being, why do you think so many leaders still find it difficult to show vulnerability, and how can we help them feel safer?
I think it's such a great question. I think there is still an expectation that leaders have to have all the answers, and it can be feel really scary to be in a position of leadership and actively say, I don't have the answers. I also think we have to look at how our leaders become leaders. So there are lots of instances where a leader is in that position because they've applied for that role and they've, gone through a successful hiring process and now they're in that position of leadership, but maybe they're new to the organization and therefore they still feel a sense of having to prove their worth to the team. We really liked our last leader. What are you going to do? And are you going to improve? So that's a sense of they don't feel psychological safety individually because they're still not yet included in the team. They're still facing the worth versus worthiness test. And so it's far too risky to say, I don't have all the answers. We also have instances where perhaps somebody is in leadership role kind of by accident. So maybe our leader has left and we now have a position that needs to be filled. So we take the most tenured person to be in a position of leadership. And that person has all of the technical expertise and the knowledge of the team and the experience, but they don't yet have the skill sets on how to lead people and how to navigate and facilitate leading a team. And so now we're expecting, again, they're feeling like they're faced with the worth versus worthiness test. I was included when I was part of the team, but now I'm in a different position. And now I'm having to be, I'm being judged that I'm in this role and maybe somebody else isn't. And so I think a lot of the time, leaders feel that themselves actually not so included and they feel in this worth versus worthiness, or often they'll put themselves in that position by way of just the culture of the organization. And so it's also, as teams, how do we respond when leaders make mistakes? They're human. They're also going to get it wrong and make mistakes. Do we vilify them? Do we talk about them? Oh, they're awful. I can't believe they did that. They're useless. Or do we recognize, okay, yeah, that was a bad one. The team are really frustrated with it, but we recognize and we're going to give you feedback on what we could do differently. Leaders, it's also up to us to create an environment where maybe we step in and we say, I know I'm new to the team and I'm not expecting to have your trust at this point. However, I'm also open to getting the feedback and receiving that feedback from you so that I can do a better job and you can teach me how I can lead you the best and most effectively. So it's this constant two-way conversation, and often it's one way. It's either from top down or often it's directive from bottom up. And so it's about how do we create an environment where both sides feel safe to kind of be vulnerable and let their guard down. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I'm looking at some of the other questions, and one of them is saying, you've mentioned the link between psychological safety and brain chemistry. What's one thing that helps the brain stay in a safe to learn state during stressful times? Because we will encounter stressful times. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you know what? I think it's why it's so important that we develop the human connection in our team. As much as possible when we're not in a high stress state, how do we develop that connection and also have that vulnerability so that when it is stressful, so many things kind of fall apart when we're in high stress state. Our unconscious bias runs riot and we start kind of stereotyping. All our biases come to the forefront. And in terms of psychological safety, it can really crumble. It's then how we respond in those stressful times. And it can be as simple as it's really high stress and maybe I do respond negatively to somebody. Maybe I do snap at somebody, or I give some really kind of unfair or inconsistent feedback. But what do I do after? There's always space and time to afterwards come back to that person and say, hey, do you know what? I was really stressed yesterday and I know what you were sharing was actually really valuable and I just didn't hear it. I just want to apologize for that. That is how we then start to build trust and connection again, so that when the next stressful situation comes, we can recognize that with each other. Because it's not a case of if stress is put on us, it's when stress is put on us. So that's why it's so much more important that we're really taking the time in those low stress moments to be able to develop some form of connection and understanding and safety with one another, so that it doesn't completely erode psychological safety in high stress situations. Hope that one helps for that question.
Yes, thank you. So if tomorrow a team leader wants to start to make the team safer, what would you suggest they start today or tomorrow? Just a small step.
Small step. I think a really great way is actually, first of all, just having human to human conversations, but actually just asking your team for, maybe you do it on an individual basis. Some people don't always feel comfortable speaking at a big kind of team sort of level. I think it's number one, you can start to ask for feedback, but I think actually just going around to your team saying thank you for the job you do, thank you for working really hard, I really appreciate, and having a moment to moment with each of your team members, whether it's a thank you, whether it's acknowledging, I saw you had to take a couple of sick days last week, how are you feeling, do you feel better, is the rest of the family okay? And just having those interpersonal moments. I never forget years ago when I started, actually trained in musical theatre originally. And I remember I started at the college, and the director of the college on week one came round and knew me by name. Hi Tash, how's your first week going? You having a good time? You're the director of this huge performing arts college. There are hundreds of students underneath you. You've taken the time to come and find me and say, hey Tash, how's your first week going? And then to really listen to my answer. Wow, I feel valued, I feel seen, I feel acknowledged in this environment, and it's brand new. I'm away from home, I'm away from everything I've known, and to know that this person is from a distance looking out for me, that feels good. And so finding those moments of human connection as a leader, if you can do that and you can build that into your habit day after day, week after week, not just because it feels trendy right now, you've attended a session, but actually it's something that you do consistently, your team will remember that about you. When I ask people about what's one act of kindness or what great leadership have they experienced throughout their career, those are always the answers. I had a leader who really took the time to get to know us. I had a leader who remembered my birthday. It's always those things. It's not, I had a leader who gave me a promotion. That's never the story people tell. It's always that human connection moment.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great note to end this Q&A on. So I'd like to thank you, our speaker of today, Tash Koster-Thomas. Thank you so much. And thank you all for participating and sharing your answers with us in the Mentimeter and the Q&A. We hope it was insightful to you. And for now, a last word from our speaker, Tash.
Thank you so much. I just want to say huge thank you to each of you for being here. And just to remember, I know psychological safety can feel like this big and complex topic, and there's lots around it. There's neuroscience behind it. But ultimately, it is the science of human connection. And it is those, like I said before, those day-to-day moments of just taking care and appreciating the people around us and for our similarities, but also our differences, that make a real change and help us to develop a truly inclusive environment and workplace. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.